So yeah, let's get started. Thanks everyone for being here on a Tuesday evening. Hopefully making the RSVP and signing on was easy. And I'm super glad to be here with Robbie from Fish and Wildlife. So, agenda and housekeeping, we're going to spend about half an hour talking about TennGreen and our work. Kristen, my colleague, hopefully will get here. She's currently stuck in traffic, but hopefully she will sign on. And then we will have a designated time for questions after the presentation. And then I'll hand the microphone over to our buddy Robbie with Fish and Wildlife. Throughout the presentation, please be courteous with your microphone and camera. Keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question. You're more than welcome to turn your camera on if you would like, but just don't be distracting on the camera. Also, feel free to utilize the chat function throughout the presentation to ask questions as we go. I'm probably not going to pause to answer them just so I don't lose my train of thought, but you're more than welcome to unmute yourself during the designated Q&A question following each respective presentation. Also, this presentation is being recorded and we're going to upload it to YouTube at a later time for anyone who wasn't able to be with us live. So just keep that in mind if you're uncomfortable, unmuting yourself or something like that. So any questions about housekeeping? Cool. So I'm going to start my timers. Make sure that we stay on time. So a little bit about TennGreen. I am Maria. I'm the land conservation coordinator, and Kristen, who hopefully will sign on, is our director of private land conservation. So she leads all of our conservation easements, which is the bread and butter of what we're going to talk about tonight. TennGreen's mission is to conserve land where people and nature can thrive. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. And you might hear me say land conservancy, land trust, those terms are interchangeable. And a land trust's most basic function is to conserve land using that tool, the conservation easement. And then we will annually visit that land to ensure that the rules within the easement are followed. We typically do not own land long-term. We might own it for a little while. Another way that we conserve land is through acquisition, so helping expand or establish parks. So we might own land for a little while, but generally speaking, TennGreen does not own land long-term. And we are accredited by the Land Trust Alliance, which is a national entity, and they ensure that all of the land trusts that our work has integrity and it's thorough. They just make sure that our work is up to par. TennGreen, we are headquartered in Nashville, but we work across the whole state and even across the state border. When applicable, we have a project in Memphis that reaches over into the Arkansas side. Over our 25-ish year existence, we have conserved over 50,000 acres, and that includes both the private conservation easements and the acquisition projects. And being a nonprofit organization, we are funded entirely by our members and sponsors. To be a member of TennGreen, I think it's like $35 for the whole year. And our big annual fundraiser is the hike-a-thon that happens every April, so keep an eye out for that. But all of our work is driven by you. And how we conserve land, these are their three primary pillars of work, and I'll get more into detail into them: the private conservation easements, the public acquisition, expanding or establishing parks, WMAs, forests, and the restoration projects, which are less frequent, typically grant funded, and typically with a partner or multiple partners. But first, Why does any of this matter? Why is conservation important? And I think oftentimes when we hear the word conservation, we think of this pristine forest and save the trees, but it is so much more encompassing and nuanced than that. And a lot of it has to do with human health. When we conserve land and we conserve water, we're protecting clean air for breathing. We're protecting clean water for drinking. We're protecting our local economies, whether that be tourism, recreation driven, or whether that be agriculture. We're protecting our identity and our heritage, from the sweeping farms of West Tennessee to the beautiful mountains of East Tennessee. Our natural environment is a lot of what makes us Tennesseans. And so, yes, we're conserving the trees and we're conserving the water and, native species, rare and endangered species, but it all ties back to us as well. And you could talk about this and pull it apart for hours, but it's just conservation is life. And more specifically, why is private land conservation important? Why not just rely on the parks or the wildlife management areas or the state forests? This here is a map of biodiversity. So where do the greatest number of unique species occur? So you can see California, lots of biodiversity, but the Southeast takes it. We have amazing biodiversity, many different types of plants and animals all occurring in the same place. And when you compare this map to federally protected land, so national forests, national parks. This map does not include state land, but there is a huge discrepancy. The places where there is the greatest biodiversity, there's not much protected land, which really puts a burden on private landowners' shoulders, on nonprofits' shoulders. It is our responsibility to protect what we've got. And interestingly, even though we have the Smokies, which is amazing acreage, 90% of the land in Tennessee is still privately owned. And at the same time, we are one of the most biodiverse inland states, meaning that we don't touch the ocean. So private landowners have a great responsibility to protect their land and to manage it responsibly. And I also wanted to hit on farmland a little bit. As I said, when we say the word conservation, we often think of these river corridors or big forests, but part of that is farmland too. This graph here is population estimates for the state of Tennessee. And we are just more and more people are coming, and we need housing for those people. We need food for those people. We need space. But our farms are that's what's taking the hit. According to the American Farmland Trust, into 2040, we are predicted to lose over 1 million acres of farmland. And that's our local economy. That is a way of life for farmers. It is open space and scenic. It's food security. It's everything. So conservation includes farms and agriculture. So now into how does TennGreen conserve land? I'll hit on each of these. First, public acquisition. So this is, as I said, expanding or establishing a park. Let's say the Savage Gulf State Park, for example. Let's say that there's a parcel adjacent to the park that's up for sale, and TDEC is interested in acquiring it, but they can't quite move quickly enough. That's where TennGreen, as a nonprofit, can move really nimbly, step in and purchase the property, and hold on to it temporarily to transfer ownership to the state later. And it is through this acquisition process that TennGreen has had its hands in some really awesome projects, including Burgess Falls, Cummins Falls, Savage Gulf is one that we've helped with, Cedars of Lebanon State Park, the Ducks Unlimited Park in Memphis. This is a really, really important arm of our work, but you guys are more interested in the easements tonight. And then the restoration projects, as I said, these are a little more few and far between, typically grant funded, typically with another partner or partners, Panther Creek Forestry, if you're familiar with them. They did some prescribed burns on one of our properties, or one that we helped with, and we've done some like woolly adelgid, like hemlock treatments. So TennGreen will often partner with another group to do these management practices. And the bread and butter of tonight is the private conservation easements. So what is a conservation easement? At its most simple, it is a voluntary, mutual, legal agreement between a landowner and a land trust. The conservation easement limits certain uses of a property in order to protect its ecological values in perpetuity. And it's that in perpetuity part that sets a conservation easement apart from like a deed restriction. This is forever. And some examples of possible rights and restrictions include subdivisions, not homes, but how many times can you cut up the property over time? Building envelopes, are you going to have your home, a barn, what's going to be on the property? Agricultural practices and resource use, mineral extraction, water, sustainable forestry management, everything. This is everything. What is unique about a conservation easement is it remains privately owned, the land. The land can be bought, sold, inherited, but it is protected forever to your conservation goals, you, the private landowner. And the rights and restrictions are tailored to that individual landowner's goals and the land. A farm in West Tennessee, a conservation easement on a farm in West Tennessee is going to be completely different from a conservation easement on a forest in East Tennessee, because those are different landscapes. You have different conservation goals, so they're tailorable. So what is in the conservation easement, the actual document? There are the recitals, those whereas statements. Why are we protecting this property? What are the conservation values? The rights and restrictions. This property may be subdivided 3 times in the future, and there may be 1 house, 1 building envelope, 1 acre in size on each subdivision forever. These rights and restrictions must be measurable and they must be enforceable. And then the boilerplate legalese, this is a very hefty document and we want to make sure that all of our bases are covered. And then the exhibits, including the survey and any building envelopes, if there are. Maybe you don't want any building envelopes. Some other important things to keep in mind are the baseline documentation report, which I will get into more detail later, a title report, which is really important, and an appraisal if you're pursuing a tax deduction. So there is a tax incentive to this conservation easement, and I will very briefly touch on it. So a conservation easement does diminish the value of your land somewhat because you are relinquishing certain rights. You're saying like 100 homes or something can never be built here. So that loss in value is considered a charitable gift, and you can calculate a federal income tax deduction from that charitable gift, that loss in value. So let's say your property is worth $1 million, and after the easement, after you say, no huge 100 unit subdivision can be here, well, your land is worth $600,000 now with the conservation easement encumbered. It's that 400,000. That's how you get that that value. And the analogy that Kristen often uses is you as a landowner, you have a bundle of sticks, and each of these sticks represents a different right. And with the conservation easement, you hand some of those sticks over to TennGreen, the subdivision, the building envelopes, the resource extraction. And those sticks have a monetary value. And you, the landowner, still own the vast majority of the sticks, including ownership. But you are you get your tax deduction from those sticks that you handed over. Yes. So, you know, we highly recommend talking with a CPA or another tax expert to figure out if that tax deduction is right for you. Not everyone gets one. So the baseline documentation report, as I mentioned before, this is a very hefty, essentially scientific study of your property. What are the different soil types that are there? The land cover, is it a conservation priority as delineated in certain plans like the State Wildlife Action Plan or the Southeast Blueprint report? What's there and what makes it important? And Kristen will go to the property and hike essentially the whole thing and take pictures with the GPS waypoints and establish the baseline. What is this property like today? Because TennGreen will be stewarding it forever. And it's this BDR where we derive those whereas statements. So if all of this sounds good to you, how do you get a conservation easement? First, you would make initial contact with us and define your goals. You know, what rights and restrictions might you be interested in? Where are you? What county are you in? What are the development pressures? And then you will submit a very simple 4-page application to us. And based on that, we will do a little research, write a conservation plan, and that plan must be then approved by our conservation committee and our board of directors. And if both of those entities say yes, congratulations, you have a fully fledged project. And that is the time at which initial project fees are due. So these project fees, they go straight to TennGreen and they're paid in 2 installments. Half of it goes toward the actual creation of the conservation easement and the baseline documentation report, which is a very involved process. And then the other half of the fees go toward the stewardship in perpetuity, since we'll need to visit the property at least once a year, every year, forever, and our legal defense fund. Since TennGreen is liable to enforce the rights and restrictions in the easement, we need that legal defense fund in case we need to take any action in the future to protect the property. So those are the fees. And then you, the landowner, will be responsible for collecting due diligence items. That includes a comprehensive survey, the clean title report, and an appraisal if you want the tax deduction. If you're not interested in pursuing the tax deduction, then you don't need the appraisal. At the same time, TennGreen will begin work on the baseline documentation report and the conservation easement. And this process, steps 5 and 6 here, can take anywhere from a few months to a few years. I would say on average, it takes about 1 to 2 years to start and finish a project. And really the timeline just depends on you, the landowner, and your needs. How well do you know, what are your conservation goals, you know, and how certain are you of that? Is there a reason that you need to get it done at any particular time? It's really your timeline, but 1 to 2 years on average. And when it's all said and done, the final project fees are due, and we will sign and notarize the conservation easement and record it at the Register of Deeds. So that easement becomes attached to the deed, and you know, anybody could look that up. And lastly, TennGreen stewards the property forever, and we submit the monitoring inspection reports to the Land Trust Alliance so that they can ensure that our work has integrity and is done thoroughly. And yeah, that's where it is. That's how you get a conservation easement, and it's forever. So that is a lot of information, and it's really been boiled down into just 18 minutes here. I'd be more than happy to take questions at this point. I don't think Kristen has joined us, so I will try my best to field the questions. You are more than welcome to unmute yourself, turn on your camera, or use the chat function.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Mark, I can hear you.
Hey, how are you doing? I'm driving to Illinois with my wife. We just left our property in White County. So I'm being as safe as I possibly can. But we have 30 acres and a 4-acre pond. And the pond has been there for over 100 years, or so says my neighbor, who fished and hunted the pond with his grandfather back in the 1930s. And so I was just trying to figure out kind of where does, we've got deer, we've got turkey, we've got blue herring and white cranes and ospreys fishing the pond. I've got huge 7-8 pound largemouth bass in the pond, and I'm concerned about the long-term health of the pond. It's not, I don't believe, naturally spring fed, but it's surrounded on 3 sides by hills. So I just didn't know where the kind of the management of, a pond like that that's supporting wildlife. How does that rank in kind of things that you have seen done in the past in other areas in the Upper Cumberland?
Sure. Thank you for your question, Mark, and thanks for joining us, even if you're on the road. Also, this will be uploaded to YouTube, so you guys can come back and watch it. So TennGreen doesn't really dabble in management, but Robbie will definitely be your guy. So stay on the call for Robbie or watch the YouTube video afterwards. But if you're interested in the conservation easement, that is definitely what TennGreen can help with. I don't know, Robbie, do you want to take a stab at it, even though you haven't presented yet?
Thinking about like pond management, that's not necessarily anything that the Fish and Wildlife Service specifically does, because I'll get into this more so in my slides. The Fish and Wildlife Service is largely concerned about federally listed and at-risk species, and in White County, we don't really have fish or mussel species that will utilize ponds or old farm ponds as any of the areas that they live in. They're mainly in creeks, streams, rivers. So they can't have that stagnant water environment. But that being said, if you're concerned about long-term health and fish populations and maintaining, like if 7-8 pound trophy largemouth bass is your goal, and maintaining the health of that pond, then there are resources with the state to reach out to through their fisheries division to then help you come out and do fish assemblage surveys and shock and assess the health of your pond, and then also work with them to see if there's any for your goals of like recreational fishing, if there's like stocking needs, or if you would need to remove fish, because sometimes that's an issue with those older ponds as well, that there's too many like brim that would be your largemouth. But it would mainly be for the state. The Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't really deal much with ponds in that area of Tennessee.
Okay, yeah, and that's fine. I kind of heard a lot of different options, and then I saw you guys on Facebook saying, "Hey, join this thing," and I'm just kind of learning as I go. So I appreciate you answering that. My only concern is that a wet weather creek does supply the pond, but it's from off site, and so over the years that creek bed has kind of filled in with silt, and so not as much water is getting to the creek as what it, or getting to the pond as what it once did. And so I just didn't know, if that was, something that came under, an easement or conservation for, maintaining, this pond, which then is, supporting all of this wildlife.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Mark. Yeah. My contact information is on the screen, so I welcome you to hit me up on email. I'll also be sending out a feedback survey in the coming days, so you'll have my email that way as well, and we can talk more about options that would be right for you. I want to answer Needs and Jeffrey.
I screenshotted your email there, so I will follow
Awesome.
up. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you.
I'll let someone else ask a question. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Mimi and Jeffrey's questions, that's kind of a twofer. My answer is kind of the same. There is technically no minimum acreage requirement. The size is one of many variables that we consider. An example of a really small easement that we did was right here in East Nashville, Laughlin Springs Park. Only 4 acres, and we encumbered it with a conservation easement. We also helped in its acquisition. It's now a metro park. But some of the criteria that the Conservation Committee uses to evaluate projects include size and location, land cover, what sorts of structures are already there, water features like wetlands, the presence of rare or endangered species in the vicinity, the priority of that region as delineated by several conservation plans like the State Wildlife Action Plan. There is a whole slew of variables that we consider. No minimum acreage, might be really small, but maybe there's a super rare something. So cost by category, corresponding amount for conserving a parcel to size. So size can play a role in cost, but it's not like we charge per acre or anything. We have a flat fee that might grow if it's super, super big, like many hundreds of acres large. We also might ask for more than our baseline fee if you need to expedite the project for some reason. But yeah, a 30-acre conservation easement is going to cost the same as a 100-acre conservation easement. Yeah, and the breakdown of the cost is just half of it goes to the creation of those 2 documents, and half of it goes towards the stewardship in perpetuity. What enforcement power do you have? What happens if TennGreen shuts down? The conservation easement is a legal document, so we are liable to enforce it. So, I mean, we can litigate. That's a scary word, but yeah, if a future landowner or a neighbor or somebody cut trees on your property, for example, that was encumbered by an easement, that would be grounds for typically we'll just send a letter and be like, hey, there's a conservation easement here, and what happens if TennGreen shuts down is the Land Trust Alliance would actually ensure that all of our conservation easements are transferred to another accredited land conservancy. So there would be no lapse in the stewardship of that easement. The Land Trust Alliance has that under control. It's 4:29, so it's about time for Robbie, but I saw you turn your camera on. You got one more quick one?
I have a question. Oh,
yeah.
Was it me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi, I'm Michaela. And my question is about ecotourism. So getting people involved, getting people to come to the special land without impacting it in a really significant way. How does TennGreen feel about that? And I'll just throw out an example. I don't know if everybody is familiar with Owl's Hill Nature Sanctuary in Franklin. It's a chunk of land. It's got some biodiversity, and then they host these hikes for people to come and learn about the native flora and fauna and walk around. And so I guess my question is ecotourism may not be the right word, but we've got to get people involved and interested. That's how you increase the participation in easements like that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Robbie, feel free to pull up your slides as I answer this question. So TennGreen, our conservation easements are typically on private land, meaning there's no public access implications. And we do those acquisition projects to help establish or expand the parks. So we have no like actual jurisdiction or say in sustainable park management and tourism, but obviously we support that heavily, you know, with more and more people coming to these parks, especially like with the pandemic, lots of people were getting outside, like huge volumes of people getting outside. And we need to make sure our parks are managed sustainably. I think TDEC actually just made like 10, 20-year management plans for all of their parks. And I think those are accessible online.
But
So
if one of your clients gets an easement, can they have people come onto the land in a controlled way, a managed way that's healthy for the land to observe wildlife, to really be a part of it?
yeah, I mean, unless you're making like buildings for commercial purposes, you know, having your buddies out for a wildlife hike, absolutely. But that's really getting into the nitty-gritty of conservation easements. But yeah, you should definitely feel free to email me if you're interested in talking more about sustainable management. But I'm very, very happy to have Robbie present on the Partners Program now.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Robbie Cogburn. I am a Partners for Fish and Wildlife biologist. So that's basically just a fancy job title for a private lands biologist. So I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm based out of Cookeville, Tennessee. But I end up covering pretty much the entire state. But I'll get into geographies a little bit later. So Maria already hit on this, but it's so important that you got to bring it up twice. Private lands are extremely important in the state of Tennessee. They make up roughly 90% of the state. So there's over 23 million acres of Tennessee that is privately owned. There's only about 3.2 million that are owned by either the federal government or the state government. And so when you think about that, and you think about all the biodiversity that the state of Tennessee hosts, that biodiversity and that sheer amount of species cannot be sustained on public lands alone. It just can't. So then that responsibility kind of falls on private landowners to sustain that biodiversity, look out for your properties, maintain it. And so that's sort of where TennGreen loves to plug in to assist private landowners in that. And that is also my job, is to assist private landowners in getting connected to resources for restoration, and then also connecting them to TennGreen if an easement is something that they're interested in pursuing. And so talking about the state of Tennessee is largely privately owned, and wildlife needs private lands. These are some of the species that are important from my perspective that occur largely on private lands. So in the top right, it's slackwater darter. It's found in largely agricultural landscapes in southwest Tennessee. And then in the bottom right, blue-masted darter. It's found in the Cumberland Plateau in these areas adjacent to Bridgestone WMA, and even extending into the rivers and streams on private lands all around. And then in the bottom left, Tennessee cave salamander. It's a federally at-risk species, so it's not federally listed, but it is considered federally at risk. And it's found in Middle Tennessee in caves and underground. And so it's extremely important to think about what we're doing on the surface for that animal. And then also the bottom middle picture. It's a plethora of common and also federally endangered species of mussels that are found in the Duck River. And so just these are some examples of the 103 federally listed species or 61 federally at-risk species that we have in Tennessee. And so this is just a breakdown of the numbers of the species that I'm largely concerned about in Tennessee. Since I am a federal private lands biologist, my emphasis is on federally listed species or petitioned, proposed candidate, or at-risk species. So I'm mainly focusing on these and doing projects to benefit these species, but my projects do also have spillover benefits for your more common or more locally rare species as well. And so I showed the picture of all the mussels in the Duck River. So I love to show this slide to really put an emphasis on the biodiversity in the state of Tennessee when it comes to mussels. So Tennessee is largely dominated by aquatic biodiversity, and freshwater mussels make up a large part of that biodiversity. So there's about 840 species of mussels in the world. If you sort of step that down, 303 are found in North America and 141 are found in Tennessee. So Tennessee alone makes up about 17% of the world's freshwater mussels, which that's mind-boggling for me considering the size of Tennessee in comparison to the entire world. But even if you step that down a little bit further, just in the Tennessee River and Cumberland River watersheds, there's 110 species, 31 of which are only found there and nowhere else. And then if you look in the top right, Australia has 29 species of freshwater mussels. So just in the Tennessee and Cumberland River watersheds, there are 31 species of mussels that are found nowhere else. There are more species there than in the entire continent of Australia. So that puts an emphasis on why Tennessee is so important, and it being largely comprised of private lands, that's why private lands in Tennessee are important. And so that's enough talk on the importance of private lands. I'll sort of tear into what the Partners Program is and what I do as my job. So basically being a partners biologist is working with private landowners to deliver habitat restoration, enhancement on their property, targeting federally listed or at-risk species. And so I work with private landowners, I work with state and local governments, I work with soil conservation districts, I work with non-governmental organizations like TennGreen, I work with other federal agencies. And then, and also land trust. I guess TennGreen's the land trust. Sorry about that. I got mixed up. But I end up working with a plethora of different partners. I guess the group or the program that I work for is accurately named. It's the Partners Program, and that seems to be my entire job is working with partners. And the projects that I do are guided by species recovery plans, the Partners for Fish and Wildlife strategic plan, and then also threat assessments. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Partners for Fish and Wildlife strategic plan in a couple slides and show a map that shows where our strategic areas are. But just a little bit more about the Partners Program. We're a voluntary habitat restoration program. So I cannot force you to do anything. The Partners Program is non-regulatory. So you cannot be in trouble for anything by me at all. It is completely up to the landowner. If I show up and ask you to do a project with me, you can tell me to kick rocks and I have to leave. And so that's one of the things that I love the most about my program is that if I'm working with a landowner, it's because they care. And then so it really makes me feel good to help landowners achieve their goals for their properties, and then also tying in species benefits and the Fish and Wildlife Services goals as well. So like I said in the previous slide, I work with other federal agencies. So a large one that I work with is USDA. So I coordinate with USDA and then also state and local levels to deliver farm bill conservation programs. So I don't know if everyone on the call is familiar with that, but the Farm Bill is a major funding source for cost share opportunities for private landowners to perform all types of restoration or land enhancement practices. And I can go really far into the weeds on that, but I don't think the call is going to be long enough. And so sort of stepping back onto the Farm Bill as well, the Partners Program, we have financial assistance dollars, and that's what the TA and FA is up top. We provide technical assistance in management planning and like suggestions of practices on property. But then we also have financial assistance dollars to provide to landowners to cost share those practices. We don't offer incentive payments like some farm bill programs do, but we do cost share on the price of those practices with landowners. And so since we have financial assistance dollars, we will leverage our funding with USDA's funding, or sometimes the Forest Service funding, or just a plethora of other different agencies, or within the Fish and Wildlife Service, to hopefully get the best deal and the best outcome for not only the Fish and Wildlife Service, the state, the landowner, but also the species as well. And so our projects typically take place on working landscapes. So largely I'm working on family forest land, family farms. Sometimes I've worked with small local governments as well, but largely it's on family farms and family forest land. And so the Partners Program is tied to working with private landowners. So we can work on private land owned by the county or county governments. We can work on land trust land. So I could work on TennGreen's land, and I have, and hence why I enjoy working with them so much. And we can also work in city and town, land owned by cities and towns. But I cannot work on federal or state lands. That's another thing that I really love about the Partners Program, is that it is specifically for landowners and not the federal or state government. So it provides a different lens or a different objectives than a lot of other governmental agencies, where they are mainly focused on federal land, whereas I can't even touch federal land in my job. So that's something I like the most. And so where can I work? This is our strategic plan map that I mentioned earlier. So out of all of Tennessee, the little polygons around some of the counties, those are what we call our focal areas. And so these focal areas are derived from density of federally listed species. So if you look in the top right, the Upper Tennessee River Basin focal area, that covers the Clinch and Powell rivers. And so up there, we're mainly focused on aquatic conservation, because the Clinch and Powell rivers host such high levels of freshwater mussel diversity. And so up there, our projects look a little bit different than in the Wilson and Rutherford County focal area, the Central Basin Karst. There, we're mainly focused on terrestrial habitat restoration. So that looks like cedar glade restoration, cutting cedars down and burning. But then also the Cumberland Plateau is our biggest, well, one of our biggest geographically focal areas, but it's also extremely diverse in the projects that we do up there. We do terrestrial habitat restoration as well as aquatic habitat restoration, because it has multiple listed plant species as well as fish and mussel species. So I really enjoy working on the plateau, but also we have the Lower Tennessee River Basin focal area, which includes and is dominated by the Duck and the Elk River systems. And so we do have these focal areas that we end up working more in, just because the resources draw us there, because I am tied to working with federally listed species. But that's not to say I can't work outside of that. If you are interested in a property that you have in Warren County or DeKalb County, I can absolutely go out there and help, or go out there and at least make suggestions. And so if you're, just because you're not in these focal areas or these polygons doesn't mean that you can't reach out to me and I can't be a resource to you. So I would still, if you're interested, I'd still say to reach out to me, and I'll have my contact information at the end. And I can, at the very least, put you in contact with a private land biologist in the area to help you out. And so I went over the focal areas, talked a little bit about the different projects that we do in those. But they all look extremely different. So what does restoration in Tennessee look like? Well, that's a loaded question. It can look like invasive species removal. So cutting down Bradford pear trees and spraying them with some sort of herbicide treatment to ensure that they don't come back and dominate these rare ecosystems. It can look like planting trees adjacent to rivers that have no riparian area or no trees on the edges and the banks. It can look like prescribed fire, so it can look like burning trees and restoring these open area grasslands. It can also look like welding steel together on a cave gate to make sure that there's no trespassing into a cave that's providing hibernaculum for bats. Or it can look like building a heavy use area for livestock feeding, like in the top right, to where you're not feeding your cows by the stream and putting in a whole bunch of nutrients and sediment into the stream and getting that away. So restoration looks completely different across the state, depending upon what the landowner objectives are, what the Fish and Wildlife Service sees as resource concerns, and then just also where you are and what resources are there. And so that's a super broad slide, so I want to dip down into project examples. And so on the Cumberland Plateau, one of the main species that I try to focus on is white fringeless orchid. And so they're found in these Appalachian acidic seeps. And so a project for white fringeless orchid, which we've done a couple of, but a project for them looks like reducing tree density. So making canopy gaps to where sunlight is hitting the ground in these seep wetlands on top of the plateau and stimulating this herbaceous layer of growth. So these flowering plants. And so projects like that, or white fringeless orchid will respond extremely quickly from just like in that right picture, a tree falling, a single tree falling and having a pocket of sunlight going to the ground. So that's a project that I love to do because the response is so quick. And it's a simple treatment of just remove canopy in some areas, not completely, but just small canopy gaps. Another project example, and these next two slides are sort of tiered together as well, but in the Central Basin where we have these limestone cedar glades. Leafy prairie clover is the species that I tie these projects to, some of them. And the next slide will be different. But leafy prairie clover is a federally endangered plant that occurs in these wet meadows and seeps that are grasslands. But nowadays, if you drive down the road, they look like cedar thickets. Whereas historically, these areas might not have been cedar thickets. Cedars were a component of the glades, but not at the densities that we see today. So these projects look like removing cedars and reintroducing prescribed fire or reintroducing fire back on the landscape through prescribed fire, like in the top right picture. And these projects are super beneficial to a plethora of different species. It's just that leafy prairie clover is the one that me as a federal private lands biologist is largely concerned with. But in the bottom right, streamside salamander is a state endangered species that ends up benefiting from these projects because they need these grass glades that are ephemeral streams. Ephemeral meaning that they have water and flow in the wintertime, but they're dried out in the summertime. And so that's what streamside salamanders need to breed and to spawn. And so that's a type of project that we do in the Central Basin. And then this is another type of project that we do in the Central Basin. It's basically the same thing, cedar removal. For this project specifically, it was for Pines ground plum. It's a plant that is only found in Rutherford and Wilson County, Tennessee, and nowhere else in the world. It's probably the rarest plant that we have in Tennessee, if not the Southeast or the country. And it's largely found on public lands, except for 3 occurrences, this one being one of them. And so the prescription for this project was to go out and remove cedars. And you can see in my little chart or timeline at the bottom, we removed cedars in December of 2021, and plant numbers skyrocketed just from increasing sunlight availability to the ground. And so it seems really simple or rudimentary, but the recipe for a lot of these projects that are going to benefit at least federally listed plant species is get sunlight to the ground, cut a couple trees down, which seems completely opposite from what a lot of people say what conservation and preservation is. But sometimes, and this isn't widespread across the state of Tennessee, but in some areas, we have too many trees. Areas that used to be grasslands, we need to reduce trees to benefit some of these species like Pines ground plum that are being choked out because a cedar tree is a whole lot more common than Pines ground plum is. There's probably only about 15,000 Pines ground plum known to man out in the wild, whereas if you walk down the road in Wilson County, Tennessee, you'll probably count 1.5 million cedar trees. So I much prefer pines, ground plum to cedar trees. And so, steering a different way than plant projects, this is a project that I recently completed working with USDA in Bedford County, Tennessee, in the Upper Duck River watershed. So that top right picture of my coworker shocking in the stream. Well, not shocking because the cow was in the stream. You can see that the major resource concern was that cows were in the stream. Cows poop a lot, they eat a lot, and they poop a lot. And their hooves, or cows are big animals, so their hooves compact the soil a lot. And cows will do a number on these headwater streams that are very small, very sensitive. And so this project was simple. It was get the cows out of the stream. So what we did was we built a fence. We provided an alternate water source, as well as some heavy use areas, and then also stream crossings for the landowner, like you can see right behind us in the far left picture. And it served to benefit the strided darter because they spawn in these small headwater streams underneath big slab rocks. But there was no big slab rocks available because cattle had access, and there was over sedimentation in the river, and those slab rocks were not available anymore. So we're hoping that now that the cows are fenced out, that the strided darters will move back in. But this is just an example of basically every single aquatic project that we do in these headwater streams is get cows out of the stream, decrease sediment inputs, and then just increase water quality, whatever way we can. And a lot of times that looks like just building a fence and keeping livestock out. And so that's sort of all my project examples. I can speak forever. I'm probably need to shut up here in a second, but I can speak forever onto that. But the big thing is, where do you start? And so you can start with either reaching out to me or your local NRCS agent, your local Quail Forever private lands biologist, or your local TWRA private lands biologist. And we can help you achieve management planning. We can assist you in implementation of practices, or we can also try and find you cost share opportunities if you want to pursue that. And then one way you can easily do that is reach out to me at my phone number or email below. And so this is my closing slide, but Maria had mentioned Kristen. So if you're curious what Kristen looked like, that's a picture of me, her, and a landowner that we worked with in the top right corner. So maybe she's not a mystery anymore. But with that, I believe I am done.
Thank you, Robbie. We still have 7 minutes to the hour, so any questions for Robbie?
I'm not monitoring the chat, Maria. Did anything pop up?
No, no questions for you in
Yep.
the chat, to my knowledge.
I've got one.
Yeah.
Did you work with the Southeast Grassland Institute to get some of those, either invasive trees out or just the really common ones?
Absolutely. Yes, I have worked with SGI a lot in the past. Over the past, I guess I've been in this job about 3.5, 4 years. I've worked with them extensively over the past couple of years to do private lands grassland restoration.
I'm just allowing space for any additional questions. Well, you're just so thorough and perfect, Robbie, that there weren't any.
That's a very nice way to say you talk too much.
Well, of course, Robbie's contact information is here. This webinar was recorded and it'll be uploaded to YouTube. I'm going to send out a feedback survey so you can let us know how is the signing up process, where did you hear about this, and any ideas, recommendations for future topics. Robbie, you did actually just have a question come through. Are you able to see the chat?
Yes, I can see it now. Yeah, so Jeffrey, I will speak on the PFW part. Probably best, and I'll let Maria take the TennGreen part. But the partners program, since there's only 2 of us in Tennessee, we're adding 2 more biologists in January. But so with 2 or 4 of us, we're a small program, so we don't really widely spread the word of us a lot because we are small, and then also we are so heavily tied to federally listed species. And federally listed species are not everywhere. So we have to be extremely targeted and strategic with what landowners we pursue and try and work with, because private or lands where there's not listed species or listed species wouldn't benefit from restoration on those lands. Not that we don't care about, we absolutely still care about, but we might try and go a different avenue. We'll still provide technical assistance, but we try and reserve our financial assistance for the properties that are going to have a direct lift for federally listed or at-risk species. So we don't widely broadcast word of the program. We do webinars with TennGreen, and then also we go door knocking a lot or cold calls. And so largely that's what my word of mouth is getting out, knocking on doors, and strategically targeting specific landowners.
Yeah, and TennGreen, we have a really robust marketing communications team, so we try to get the word out on social media a lot. We also do have a strategic land conservation plan. A lot of that data comes from the state wildlife action plan. Just kind of mixes together a whole bunch of data. And we endeavor to do like in-person dinners or like lunch and learns, things like that, and then webinars like this. Sometimes it's just hard to get the word out because not everyone's on social media and not everyone's going to see a flyer, you know, at your local co-op store or something. So we do try our best to get the word out. But a lot of the times it's word of mouth. So definitely if you know you have family or friends who might benefit from these programs, let them know, send them our websites. Yeah, it's word of mouth works very effectively, I find. We have a couple more minutes if there's any more questions. Well, if you do think of more questions, hopefully you have me and Robbie's contact information now. And as I was saying before, I'm going to send out a survey, and I'll include the YouTube link for this video, as well as my email and Robbie's email. So hopefully you'll have everything that you need. And thank you very much for taking the time out of your evening to listen to us. All right, everyone. I'm gonna stop the call now. Have a great night.
Thank y'all.